So, second novels, a notoriously tricky hurdle for some authors to get over. I wasn't particularly concerned about these two authors because whilst these may be their second novels, they're both incredibly experienced writers. And the reason why I'm looking at them together is not simply because they're second novels, but because I think both of these writers come from a similar place. They both have a very clear theory behind their writing and a very clear idea about what should and shouldn't be included in fiction. And by coincidence or not, they both have quite similar narrators in these novels, both male protagonists who are divorced, disaffected with life, and tired. First of these is Vulgar Things by Lee Rourke. Rourke's debut, The Canal, is a book I reviewed a long time ago and absolutely loved. Set on a canal towpath in London, a book that managed to be about boredom but was never ever boring and incredibly atmospheric. I really would recommend reading it. Vulgar Things is set in Southend and follows a man called John Michaels, who is contacted by his brother to be told that their estranged uncle has killed himself and lives in a caravan on Canvey Island near Southend. And he is tasked with going to this caravan, clearing it out, and getting all of their uncle's belongings. Whilst he is there, of course, he unearths all sorts of interesting stuff. And the real interest for me with the book, again, was to do with atmosphere. I didn't know, for example, that Canvey Island, for the most part, is actually below sea level. It's reclaimed land, and there is something rather weird about the atmosphere of the place, as anybody who has been there may attest. What Rourke does is something even more interesting, which is with his disaffected narrator, he manages to create an extraordinary, almost dreamlike atmosphere about Canvey Island and Southend. There's this permanent air of menace and this sense all the time that his narrator is not really keeping a particularly good grip on reality. He meets a girl who he wants to save, and he keeps meeting who he thinks is her, but we get the sense as a reader that this is a different woman that he keeps meeting each time. There's something very, very odd. And that is because he's also becoming very confused by what he discovers amongst his uncle's belongings. And it will be to do with looking at his own family history about the uncle that he never really knew and unearthing some quite significant secrets. As I said, atmosphere is everything in this book, as it was in The Canal, and an incredibly immersive read. I read it very quickly, even though it has this quite sort of leaden atmosphere. I felt like I was very, very involved, and as a reader, of course, very, very worried for my protagonist. So another fantastic piece of writing from Rourke, who remains a very, very interesting writer, and I will be intrigued to see what he does next. But as I say, he gets over the second novel hurdle with flying colours. Now we have Munich Airport by Greg Baxter. I read Baxter's first book, Preparation for Death, only after seeing some very, very positive reviews for it elsewhere. I struggled through it, and I found it a bit too navel-gazy for my taste. That said, when his debut novel came through the postbox, I did read that. It's called The Apartment. You'll notice that I haven't got a review of it on the blog, and that is because I did get through it, but only just, and I found it, to be honest, a bit boring. And yet, his second novel arrives through the post, Munich Airport, and I still pick it up because I'm convinced that Greg Baxter has got something interesting to say, and I know a lot of writers put a lot of stock in him, so I sit down and I read it. But again, I have a slight problem. This looks at an American expat who goes to Germany with his father to collect the body of his sister, who has died of starvation. And whilst they're on their way back to the US, stuck in the airport, in a kind of limbo, waiting for the coffin to be loaded onto the plane and to get home, he narrates us through how they have found themselves at this point. I use the word limbo because that's exactly what it feels like. They're in this, there's something about airports, isn't there, where you are stuck between one country and another. And whilst they're there, he's able to sort of look back over the previous few days that they've had in Germany, but then, of course, even further back and looking over their family history to try and work out why his sister was able to starve herself. It's a leaden and quite depressing read. The narrator is very hard to engage with, or at least to be interested by. And there is some good stuff in here. There is something really interesting about the idea of somebody starving themselves. And there is... so that seam of the novel I found really interesting. And what I think he does, which is really clever, is that without even realising it, his narrator and indeed his father both starve themselves over the course of the few days that they're in Germany. And this, of course, leads to a slightly weird, heightened mental state because of what's happening to their body. And that really, really worked for me. I think that's incredibly clever, and stylistically, with the prose, he does something very interesting with that. But it just wasn't quite enough for me. The book doesn't quite work because I wasn't really clear about what it was trying to say, and it was very hard to be particularly engaged in a family story because threads are picked up and then dropped. And for me, the idea of the starvation was the thing that really, really kind of got me. So again, I'm struggling to really hit it off with Greg Baxter, but I will persevere as long as people keep telling me to, and maybe one day I'll give up. So there we go. 2 second novels. Next, I've no idea what I'll be talking to you about, but hopefully it will be interesting. Thank you for taking time to listen to this. Take care.